Welcome to the Council for a Parliament of the World's Religions webinar series. I'm Dirk Ficke, and I serve as the Council's Executive Director. Following today's presentation, we'll have time to take questions from our listeners. At any point during the webinar, you may type questions into the box on the screen. Today's webinar is entitled, "What is my responsibility for peace in the world? 5 steps towards a peace process," and features Alexandra Asseily. Ms. Asseily is a psychotherapist with a focus on conflict resolution, whether in the individual, family, tribe, or nation. In 1988, she initiated Harikat as-Sama, the Garden of Forgiveness, in central Beirut, Lebanon. She is a governor and a founder of the Center for Lebanese Studies at Oxford University. He is also a member of the board of the Grand Hermes Foundation for Peace, an advisor on the World's Religions and Spiritualities Advisory Council of the Fetzer Institute, and a former member of the advisory board of the Center for the Study of World's Religions at Harvard University. I had the privilege of being with Alexandra last November in Beirut for a very moving 4-day conference entitled Healing the Wounds of War. An experience that really left me changed. And so it's a great pleasure to introduce Alexandra. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you, Dirk. It's a pleasure to be with you. And good morning, and good afternoon to other people, and good evening to even further beings. I'm delighted and happy to be with you all today. So, what is my responsibility for peace in the world? How can we help heal the wounds of history? 5 steps towards a peace process. I shall begin, though, with a long and very personal story about my relationship with war, external, internal, and intergenerational, and then about taking responsibility and a journey towards forgiveness before reaching the 5 steps. So patience, everybody. As a child in the UK, during the Second World War, we were bombed out of our house, and my brother and myself, as small children, were sent away to stay in the countryside with friends whom we didn't know. For me, that was scarier than the bombs. Whilst we were staying with this family, their father, also in the Navy, was killed at sea. My mother, as a child, fled the Russian Revolution and became a refugee in Bulgaria, then France, with her parents, who lost everything. They then became refugees again during the Second World War in France, losing their home. My grandparents never returned to their motherland, Russia. My father fought in all kinds of wars over the world as an officer in the British Navy from the age of 18. His eldest brother had been killed as a young cadet at 16, drowned at the Battle of Jutland in the First World War. During the Second World War, my father was away at sea for 4 years, leaving my mother to cope with my brother and myself in war-torn England. We didn't recognize him when he returned. Now, after that long saga, I'm going to jump into my next war stories, which echo my childhood ones. In 1969, I married a Lebanese, George Asseily, whom I'd met when Lebanon seemed to be the proverbial land of milk and honey. On the day of our wedding, the first signs of war in Lebanon began, and we, along with family and most of our guests, were held under curfew that night and for the following 3 days. Real war came later, so we had a few years of carefree times with our children, building our nests and our lives until 1975, when war tumbled upon us, and bit by bit, Lebanon imploded on itself until 35 different groups were fighting each other, and much of the country was destroyed, including our nests. as we moved from place to place in an attempt to stay safe. One day I was at home upstairs in Beirut with the children downstairs playing when the first of the deadly car bombs exploded outside in the street, blowing a car onto our roof. It was so violent, I thought it was an atomic bomb. I could hardly believe I'd survived and dreaded going downstairs. I felt sure that everyone else in the house, including my children, must be dead. Every door and window was smashed, blown out, or in. Yet by miracle, each child and others had been blown to safety, into a cupboard, under a table, or behind some form of protection. My husband George and I later, under intense bombardments, had a rather macabre way of sleeping on the floor under an alcove, head to tails, behind this huge chest, so that if a shell came, maybe only one head would be hit. My main challenge came when so many of our efforts to do good things turned to dust. Early in the war, my husband's textile factory was burnt to the ground, and militias, who I thought were protecting us, destroyed the woman's workshop I had helped to create in a refugee camp, along with the camp. Later, I coordinated foreign NGOs, and in 1978, after the first Israeli invasion, was appointed overnight by the Lebanese government to the High Relief Committee, in charge of all foreign aid. I travelled south with the first possible UND flight, being shot at all the way as we flew a few inches above the waves. Apparently, this made us less of a target. I saw the horrors of the invasion and the agonies of the refugees whose villages had been wiped off the map, and where unexploded fragmentation bombs still lay around as playthings for children. I was briefly arrested. I witnessed the beginnings of yet more terror, 4 more invasions, more occupations. Later, it seemed no longer possible to keep our children safe. So with a very heavy heart, I moved to London, detached from what I felt I could do best, and detached from where I wanted to be and all my present life, back to being a humdrum mum of 5 and on the school run. Not a very high ego deal, that was. Anyway, it was essential. My husband stayed behind to help. I began to reflect on war and the patterns emerging from my family story. I was also heartbroken and angry. I was angry with the Lebanon that I had loved, disintegrating before my eyes, angry at the senseless deaths, the kidnappings, the disappearance of so many thousands, including many friends and colleagues, angry with man's inhumanity to man. That's the phrase I use, as I haven't found another. I was so angry about what I projected out onto all those people who created the war in Lebanon. The fighters, the politicians, the religious leaders, the foreign powers, who so often came to help and then became part of the problem. I found it all just too impossible to comprehend. And then, with a lot of reflection, I started to think about me. So what's my responsibility as a human being? Am I different? How come I'm different? I must be the same. I must have the same impulses to kill or to be violent. I must have those in me. And then I started to reflect on my own family's background, all the wars we've been involved in, all the ancestral patterns that I'm part of. So much pain and so many huge grievances going back in time, caused by war, as part of my being. This was very sad and very difficult to face. How to escape these angry, sad, victim thoughts and feelings? My anger and rejection of Lebanon, my rejection of all those people whom I considered had contributed to the war. All this pain was stopping me going back in a positive, creative way to contribute to a better future. I was trapped. This dilemma started the long journey of forgiveness, the long journey of attempting to forgive myself for having these angry thoughts and for my rejection of Lebanon and war. There were so many deaths and so much useless destruction and loss to come to terms with. In 1983, during our exile, as we called it, in London, together with others, we met weekly in our home to see if we could determine a viable Lebanon, a Lebanon that wouldn't fall apart under sectarian stress. As a result of these meetings, we founded the Centre for Lebanese Studies, affiliated to St. Anthony's College, Oxford University, in 1984. The centre is active to this day. And we still don't know all the answers, as you can imagine. In 1991, with our children, we faced this destruction yet again and our old broken dreams, along with the family homes we had once lived in and loved. Our previous life plans lay similarly scattered. Wandering sadly with my children through their old happy holiday places, absolutely nothing seemed to remain. Just graffiti, an old crumpled bedspring perhaps. And then on the ground, torn and crumpled in the rubble, shaken, I saw the last page from a novel by Proust. Only la fin, the end, was readable. Nearby lay another page from Ian Fleming's James Bond, and only the title, Live and Let Die, was visible. Between these two amazing messages was a small, fragile, pink crocus, pushing through the fragmented concrete floor. I wish I could find the photo of this, though the image of it shines still in my mind, an image of hope and renewal. As I began to learn to forgive myself, it helped me to begin to understand and forgive our human capacity to destroy, without which I would not have been able to return to the continuing violence, nor to being part of a more peaceful Lebanon. Many years later, I had a wonderful opportunity to test myself when I traveled for a week with two former militia leaders, a Christian and a Muslim, both of whom had fought ferociously in the war, to talk to YPO groups across the US about forgiveness and war. I found I could at last see my fellow travelers as human beings, rather than killers and destroyers. So, during my long journey towards better understanding forgiveness and my part in it, I worked with groups and individuals as a psychotherapist, and through some deep experiences with echoes from past generations, I began to realize that there seemed to be a contract between the living and the dead. That the living hold the dead, and the dead hold the living, as though tied together through grievances and old stories which have not yet been released. These then recreate cycles of violence over and over again, unless released through compassion and forgiveness. Reflecting on this, whilst at the Spiritual Congress in Spokane in '97, I asked God a casual question. Am I on the right track, God? Do the living hold the dead, and the dead hold the living? And I place my hands one above the other to illustrate this relationship. The inner response to this simple question was utterly overwhelming. Every cell in my body seemed to come alive, as though hit with huge voltage and light. My life changed. I could not ignore the immensity of this experience. I could not just go on as before. This simple question and the response to it took me on the long guided search to symbolize this vision. It also gave me the enormous strength and courage I needed to take me through the next period of my life. I began to be guided step by step across huge difficulties, which often seemed to melt away, to create the Garden of Forgiveness in the center of Beirut. A garden set between 3 mosques, one of which had originally been a Crusader church, and 3 ancient cathedrals, and a shrine to the Virgin Mary. All these are set amongst ruins going back 3,000 years of human living on an area in the very center of Beirut, heavily fought over during the Civil War. Now the whole of Beirut's central district is being rebuilt by a company called Solidaire, the company which became responsible for redesigning and rebuilding it after the Civil War. The Garden of Forgiveness was designed by Catherine Gustafson and Neil Porter following an international competition in 1998. The designs have been widely shown, even at the MoMA in New York. The garden was due to be finished in 2006. Alas, the Israeli invasion of that year and the resulting security and political challenges stopped work on the garden. Presently, the garden lies unfinished between Martyr Square, also unfinished, and Parliament, which has been rebuilt. 2 important national places. Your prayers and intention that this present stalemate be released will no doubt become part of the next miracle, inshallah, as we say in Arabic, with God's will. In spite of the garden's unfinished state, it has already been a symbol for many. In 2005, a group of women who had lost family members in 9/11 came to visit Lebanon. We planted an olive tree in the garden and prayed. They said, poignantly, that they had been able to bury their dead there, in the center of Beirut, as they placed photos of their loved ones in the earth around the tree. It was a very extraordinary moment. Last November, after an international 3-day conference, which Dirk mentioned earlier today, we had a conference workshop called Healing the Wounds of History, Addressing the Roots of Violence. And we planted another olive tree, our 5th, and hung copper tags on it inscribed with the things, events, or people that we were ready to forgive. A Rwandan friend who lost his parents at the hand of his best friend, Jean-Paul Samputo, sang a song dedicated to the Garden of Forgiveness. On March the 25th, now an Islamo-Christian National Day in Lebanon, to celebrate the Annunciation, we, the Healing the Wounds of History group, together with the Islamic Christian Association, shall be having an event at the Garden of Forgiveness outside the shrine to the Virgin Mary, who is equally venerated by Christians and Muslims. Please join us in whatever way you can. So, you may now be wondering when I should be talking about the 5 steps. Well, here I go. At a conference in Bali in 2001, whilst working on peace, together with 2 colleagues, we organized workshops. And I first presented this process there. I then worked with many groups and individuals with this program from time to time. In Innsbruck in 2005, we ran daily sessions over 2 weeks to hundreds of people. I also briefly presented it at the Parliament of World Religions in Melbourne in 2009, and in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2010, and then again late 2011, just recently at a workshop at the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations conference in Doha. A few touching forgiveness stories come to mind following the 5 steps. One woman told me that after the process, she had gone to find her long-lost father. She had realized she wanted to ask forgiveness of this demon figure in her life, whom she had hated for 50 years since he had abandoned her and her mother when she was 3. Once free of the grievances and hate, they became good friends, until his death a few years later. She had freed herself and him of this old heartbreak and family burden. In Melbourne, 2 brothers, one on the eve of his wedding, had been estranged for most of their lives. They came together when one of them realized how bullying he'd been to his brother since childhood, and asked forgiveness of him. This courageous public act transformed them both and their families, and triggered others, until it seemed as if the whole room was crying with the relief that forgiveness can bring. At last, on that note, I will begin the challenge of sharing this 5 steps process across time and space with you all. I trust that all this new technology will bring us together as if we were in one room. So here goes for the 5 steps peace process. And this is a peace process for the individual. So what is my responsibility for peace in the world? How can we help heal the wounds of history? And this peace process and these 5 steps are to encourage peace, harmony, and understanding between people regardless of our ethnic origin or religion, and to understand how our collective memories of the past influence our present identities and how we tell and live our lives. And we can explore together how historically compounded grievances and deeply buried wounds may continue to hold us in the cycle of violence. To understand how through compassion, understanding, and forgiveness, these grievances may be transformed so that we can break the cycle, become good ancestors, and become part of the peace process. Through individual in-depth reflection and feeling in a safe way, we may draw on each other's experience and explore our own responsibility for peace. We may discover which aspects of ourselves are not fully contributing to peace and where these parts originate. We may then understand how best to align them and release the grievances which these parts carry through forgiveness and surrender to the divine or great life force. What is normal is the ebb and flow of tensions that form part of a healthy interaction among life forces which influence us in this world. But when tensions and fears rise high, conflicts can erupt, and we often blame others for our grievances, instead of taking responsibility for the part which we may have played in fueling these tensions. So, conflict need not be the norm, but the exception. The following 5 steps are for each one of us who wishes to develop a greater awareness of the need for harmony and develop more capacity to manifest it in our lives. And these 5 steps can be experienced individually or collectively. The practice of open communication, which includes compassionate listening among individuals and actively facilitating group dynamics, is also helpful to this process. Step 1. The first step is to take responsibility for one's own part in any conflict, imbalance, tension, grievance, problem, with courage, honesty, and humility, even if one does not feel personally involved in conflict. I know with experience that this is a great challenge. The second step is to ask a number of questions, a few of which I will ask today. The third step is to understand the power of forgiveness and compassion. By understanding and allowing for forgiveness of oneself and others, including our ancestors and our collective past, we can let go of shame, guilt, and fear. We then no longer need to uphold, consciously or unconsciously, the same grievances from one generation to another. As we forgive others, we forgive ourselves, and vice versa. Now, just a few notes about forgiving, because many of us resist forgiveness because of the feeling that we may be letting a significant other or others off the hook of justice and retribution, and also betraying our obligations to our ancestors or our collective past, or even to our own heartbreak. Also, many of us resist forgiving because we've been so badly hurt within our own family or group, and fear forgetting our pain and suffering if we were to let go of our beliefs and grievances. However, forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is about releasing and surrendering the pain embedded in memory, which holds us to cycles of violence. Our resistance to being able to forgive holds us back with the weight of the past and stops us from fully and freely expressing ourselves with our gifts and talents today. And surrendering our pain and asking for forgiveness can be done at any time in this healing process. Step 4. To understand the changes we could make in order to speak with our own inner cohesive authority, our authentic self, thereby helping us to promote harmony and peace in the world. The 5th step is to go out and share this healing process with others and practice it. It can transform ourselves and our communities and, of course, ourselves. I've done this process hundreds of times myself, and I continue to be surprised by things that I learn about myself from it, and the gifts that I suddenly receive that I had not been aware of, and the tensions that I have that I wasn't paying attention to. And this 5-step process can encourage spiritual understanding and an awareness of our true selves. So before I ask the questions, normally I would suggest to sit or stand quietly relaxing for approximately 3 to 4 minutes. Now, if we did that today, maybe you'd all get bored, but the theory is that to get quiet, even across time and space, just to go inside yourselves perhaps, and allow thoughts to come and go to clear the mind of daily events and to become quiet. And as I ask each question, just internally wait, and the reply may come in a variety of ways. Picture, a series of images, words in the head, words written on an internal screen, a feeling, thoughts, a combination of all or some of these responses. And you may reflect for a few moments on what has been received and get an inner understanding. And then to pause, relax, clear your mind before asking of yourself the next question or hearing me ask the next question. So here are a few of the questions which you may want to reflect upon. And again, just go inside yourself to do so. I know all this is a bit of a challenge when you've got screens in front of you and my voice coming at you, but do your best. So ask at this time, before every question, because time changes and we change with it. At this time, what is peace and harmony for me? In what way am I preventing peace and harmony in and around me at this time? What is the special gift, spiritual or physically, I'm not yet fully using at this time to bring healing in me and around me? At this time, in what way am I preventing harmony and peace in my body? In what way I am not, and I go further, but I was about to jump into another question, but actually here is, what is the gift that I'm not yet using to bring harmony to my body, harmony and peace? What is the gift? In what way am I preventing harmony in my family at this time? What is the gift that I'm not yet using to bring harmony and peace to my family? Now those questions can be repeated, replacing body and family with other words such as work, group, nation, and world. And in this way, we learn to realize that in every area of our life, we have responsibility. And we can receive gifts to deal with that responsibility. And that we are part of the problem, yet we can become part of the solution. And now I'm going to go into the forgiveness aspect of all this, which is at the core of it all. What stops me from forgiving myself? How do I forgive myself? Can faith allow me to forgive myself? What is forgiveness when it comes from grace and faith? What is my gift for healing when I have fully forgiven myself or allowed myself to be forgiven? And all these are internal questions, and they sort of leave the head out of it if you can. I'm going to jump the next series of questions, but they are important ones. I'm going to jump them because of time, but they are all important. And it's really to realize that we are all both victims, persecutors, enemies, terrorists. We all are everything. And the more we can come to terms with those within ourselves and forgive those aspects, then the more we can forgive others. So, how may I fully accept the other at this time to bring unity to myself? What is the potential for healing when I fully accept the other? How is it when all parts of me are fully in harmony? Now, you could put in that other, you could think of somebody who you have the greatest grievance with. So that other might be husband, wife, child, father, mother, someone with whom you have the greatest grievance, somebody at work. So how may I fully accept the other to bring unity to myself? And this is at the core of all those things. Our greatest responsibility is to be good ancestors, said Jonas Salk. And I attempt, having 11 grandchildren and 5 children, to hoover up my grievances best I can, so that I'm a good ancestor. So the following questions related to family history, experiences, ancestral beliefs and patterns are essential to understand the deeper roots of present conflicts. At this time, what do I model or inherit from my father's family line which is no longer appropriate? What do I model or inherit from my father which is no longer appropriate? What do I model or inherit from my mother's family line which is no longer appropriate? What do I model or inherit from my mother which is no longer appropriate? And ask for the grace of an inner awareness of forgiveness for ourselves, our parents, and our ancestors. And once more, at this time, what is the gift from my father's family line which I'm not yet fully using in my life at this time? What is the gift from my father which I'm not yet fully using in my life at this time? What is the gift from my mother's family line which I'm not yet fully using in my life at this time? What is the gift from my mother which I'm not yet fully using in my life at this time? And ask for an inner awareness of gratitude for ourselves, our parents, and our ancestors. Just take time to do that. And I'd like to thank you for staying connected. And this quote reminds me that we're all connected in any case. And I thank you very much for being part of this journey today. And if you want the full list, you can find it on the following web page. And I hope to meet you here and there in the next few years of my life. Goodbye.
We now have an opportunity to hear from questions from those listening in from around the world, and I'd like to begin with a couple. Alexandra, can you share with us in a little more detail how grievances and wounds are transferred from generation to generation and their cumulative impact?
That's a big question, Dirk, but it's the question that I've been working on for the last sort of 25 years since the war. I think that we inherit them rather like we inherit blue eyes or fair hair or dark hair, that somehow with nowadays with epigenetics we're beginning to realize that these things can be handed down from generation to generation. This morning I was working with someone who had an intergenerational, if you like, receiving of heartbreak, that heartbreak was being handed down from generation to generation. And heartbreak that has not been forgiven will reappear in the following generation. This is my experience. So anything that has not been released can appear in the next generation. Anything that has not been forgiven, that has not been talked about, even old stories, they may reappear in the next generation.
And is it through stories? Is it through interpersonal interactions, behavior towards others? Is this how it gets transmitted?
Well, it can obviously come through stories, but a lot of these things just pop up unconsciously. They're completely unconscious. So things which people are literally unconscious of. So they can pop up and we can think that they're ours, but in fact they don't belong to us. And they can pop up from 400 years ago, and we're driven to repeat a story maybe from the Crusades or from some ancient old wound that has not been released. And if you think of our wars at the moment, a lot of them are coming from the past. They're coming from old stories that were not resolved or forgiven.
And what are the variety of motivations that you've witnessed over the years for people to take this very important step of beginning with themselves in terms of addressing grievances and forgiveness? What varieties of motivations have you seen?
Very often it's for people who've hit a sort of wall of pain somewhere in their lives, that they don't know what to do anymore. Maybe it's death, maybe it's illness, maybe it's work, maybe it's all kinds of things, maybe it's marriage. It's going to be various things that lead us to start asking questions of ourselves. And then we become more perhaps open to looking further. Much in the way that I hit wall, and then I had to think about things in a different way.
Are there a couple of stories of forgiveness that you find most inspiring that you could share?
I have so many. Well, I was talking about Jean-Paul, who was with us at the conference, and how he, after the Rwandan war, was really destroying himself because he was so angry with his best friend and so upset and so betrayed by his best friend who he'd grown up with, a Hutu, who'd gone and killed his parents, his family. And so his life was disintegrating, his marriage was disintegrating, everything was going wrong for him. And then he read something I think I'd written in somewhere called Don't let history control you, let it inform you. And he suddenly realized that his history was controlling him, but not in a positive way. So he went back so courageously to his friend, and he decided to forgive him. And he released his life back to himself. he released, he became, his life completely changed. And he's now very working for peace. And in fact, we're supposed to be going to Rwanda soon. But he completely transformed his life from being the victim. And I think that's what the main thing is that when we feel as though we're victims, that's the time to start looking.
Is there another story that comes to mind?
So many. You've caught me unawares. Well, I remember one of my first people who came to see me was a very troubled young boy of about 14. He had a belief that in order to be honorable, he had to fight for his country. He was French. He wanted to be a general in the army. And he had this belief, in order to be honorable, I have to die for my country, not fight for my country. I have to die for my country. And I thought, where is that coming from? It's almost like a, that's like a modern bomb blowing yourself up. So he was in a catch-22, and he couldn't do anything because he was caught by this belief, which he was completely unconscious. And it came to be that this belief came from a family story of his family always being involved in the Crusades from time began, and that they were all linked to this unconscious story. So this was driving his life. He was completely unaware of it. And this was hundreds of years old. So it was forgiving the Crusades. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to follow through with that story because he went back to France. But it's been kind of in my mind ever since, how we are controlled by the past.
Would you share a little more about your vision of what the Garden of Forgiveness in downtown Beirut could mean to the healing of that country, and what will it take to complete it?
You're asking the big questions, Dirk. I will do my best. The Garden of Forgiveness came from this original experience. And so it was the best I could do to remind us all of the importance of forgiveness in releasing the contract between the living and the dead, i.e. between the past, the present, and the future. And I saw these cycles of violence which have been present in Lebanon for so many centuries. And this was just my doing my best that I could do to remind myself and make a place where people could meet, not in a church, but in a spiritual place, in a free and spiritual place, just to become a place of contemplation, really. This wasn't a teaching. This was more of an opportunity, a place of opportunity. That's what I call it. A place where we can be guided.
Well, I know having visited with you, I felt the power of the place, both in terms of its connection to history, but also the way in which it embodies a way of moving forward. Actually, these questions are really coming from interested people from around the world, and a number of people have kind of been captured by the photos and the story of the Garden of Forgiveness. And I understand that in some ways the inability to bring it to completion is in fact symbolic of the current conflict in Lebanon.
Absolutely.
Is that not the case?
Absolutely. This is the forces, not only in Lebanon, but in the world at this very moment. The forces that you read about in the press every single day, the forces that are happening, well, I don't need to tell anybody about them because they're all on your TV screens. But all these huge challenges are all within old history. They're all connected with old history. They're all based on old grievances, old colonial grievances. You know, everything, whether it's Iran, whether it's Israel, whether it's Syria, they're all based on old grievances, which were not resolved. And they're coming back for more pain and more, because people have not realized how important it is to go back and to resolve them. And the Garden of Forgiveness, I don't know, I think maybe it's like the Healing the Wounds of History conference. It's about reminding ourselves of the importance of this work, individually, in groups, in communities.
Have you had some experience where these steps, this question comes from India, about where these steps have been applied not only with individuals, but in a community or organizational setting?
I've had no personal experience of, I mean, I've known that groups have done this on their own without me, but I don't know necessarily all the feedback. I know therapists have used them, I know groups have used them, I know religious groups have used them, but I don't know all the answers. Some of these lie private, but they mainly address the individual and how the individual relates to him or herself within his community or organization. That can shift things greatly.
Mm-hmm. So clearly part of your motivation is from your love and a marriage with George, and the way that's taken you to Lebanon to be a part of the history there, and now part of the peacemaking effort. Can you say a little bit more about the role of spirituality in your own motivation?
Well, I think without spirituality, I don't think I could have done it. I mean, everything was guided by attempting to find that part of me which connects with the part of me that probably my most spiritual aspect, without which none of this probably would have happened. That's the part that connects with God, or with whatever one believes that to be. I believe it's a sort of, I believe in God, so I call it God. But I think it's without that spirituality, I don't think any of this would have happened. But what is that spirituality? I'm at a loss really to tell you, because our spirituality is such a personal journey, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I hardly know how to define spirituality, except to say that it's something that connects us to something much greater than ourselves, and a much bigger story, and a much more loving story, a much more forgiving story.
A question from the UK wants to focus on how religion can be a source of the conflict and also a resource for efforts at peacemaking. What's your experience of that been?
Well, I've had huge experience about how religion can be a source of the conflict. But I think it's when religion becomes a tool in the hands of man. And most times it's been used as a tool in these wars, certainly in Lebanon. We have 17 different sects, religious sects. And at one time or another, they've all been fighting each other. So obviously that has not been greatly used for peace. But I think that if religion is based on love and not guilt or sacrificed or manipulated, then love becomes the greatest resource of most peacemaking and most groups. And if that religion urges us to take responsibility and helps us to understand that we may ourselves be part of the problem, then we can perhaps receive the love and forgiveness ourselves and share that with others.
This final question comes from California about any advice you would have about teaching this process and peacemaking to children and to youth.
Well, that's a great question, which I'm asking myself every day. And at the moment, with the Center for Lebanese Studies, we have a project in Lebanon on education. And we're about to take on maybe a Schools of Forgiveness, which was started in Colombia. And I'm attempting to set up this Schools of Forgiveness program in Lebanon. I think we need to learn how to forgive. It's not a very trendy thing to forgive, is it? And most of us have not been taught how to do that, unless we're very lucky. So this is really a process, and we're going to attempt to teach this process. And I will be able to let you know more about this in maybe a couple of years' time. But for the time being, we are going to run forgiveness schools, God willing, in about, a year's time.
Alexandra, I want to thank you for sharing your personal journey with us today, your insights. I know how committed you are to this work, and Lebanon is fortunate to have you. We want to thank you, all those around the world, for joining us today for this talk. We invite you to join us for our next webinar on April 11th, entitled The Sacred Art of Listening with Kay Lindahl. We also invite you to stay connected to the interreligious movement through our email newsletter and by visiting our social network at peacenext.org. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website within the next few days if you'd like to share it with others or listen to it again. The vision of the Council for a Parliament of the World's Religions is of a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. The Council works to cultivate harmony among the world's religious and spiritual communities and to foster their engagement with the world and its guiding institutions. For years, the Council has creatively and concretely worked to link the interreligious movement from the local to the global, and we send our thanks to all of you who are doing your own part for a better world. Once again, on behalf of the Council, thank you for joining us today.